All right. Welcome back to the show. I am joined by Rahul Chhajed, and I think I just butchered it again after you just told me. So I'll have you correct me in a second. But Rahul's a second-time guest, and he is the first vice president and senior director at Matthews Real Estate Investment Services. He leads their kind of healthcare division, talks to lots of veterinarians all the time, and is focused on real estate. So we're going to chat more about real estate here in a second. And he and the team work all over the country, have a lot of different various clientele, extremely active in vet med, and want to really dive into the real estate side of veterinary medicine because there's been some updates. It's been about 2 years since we chatted. He came on the show for number 77. But Rahul, thank you for coming back. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for having me again. I'm excited.
Outside of not being able to pronounce your name, which I apologize, and I'm the worst at. I appreciate the time. It was great to see you at VMX and be able to chat in person. And I guess let's just jump right into it. Rates have risen, right? So it's wild to see the fastest rate hiking cycle in the history of I guess recorded history in the US at least. It's put pressure on a lot of asset classes. There's obviously things in the news, right, with things going on out kind of your way, right, in California with various different banks. How's it impacting veterinary medicine and real estate? And then what have you seen from the other kind of medical verticals that you cover as well?
Sure. Yeah, good question. So the Silicon Valley Bank thing was quite a debacle, pretty fresh right now. I think it's obviously too soon to tell how that's going to impact veterinary real estate or healthcare real estate or just generally the real estate market. The good news is, and again, it still might be premature, but it looks like the contagion was contained with obviously SVB being backstopped and then, some of these other regional banks kind of recovering today in the stock market. But the rise in interest rates has definitely impacted the real estate market. Just simply put, if it costs more to borrow money to buy an asset, well, that asset is going to have to deliver you a higher return. And many times these assets, they're fixed income assets, right? So if you buy a deal, a vet deal, a dental deal, whatever it is, there's a set lease in place with a set rental rate. So that rental rate can change. The only thing you could do to justify buying that deal is paying a lower price for that fixed rent, for that fixed income, right? And so that's the first order effect is as it gets more costly to borrow, you're just not going to be able to pay more money. And you're coming out of a historic bull market where I think the number was $8 trillion was printed and injected in the economy. And there was just a lot of artificial demand pumping the entire market, specifically net lease real estate. And the pullback that you're seeing now is just first because of the quantitative tightening. You're having just less money in the system. And then because it's getting more costly to borrow, a lot of that demand is coming down. So the second order effect is because there's just so much now supply on the market, right? And less buyers for that supply, you're just seeing a supply demand mismatch and imbalance. And so generally what you've seen is for the core assets, stuff with long-term leases, really well located, you're still finding some private buyers, some 1031 exchange buyers that'll buy that product. But I would say pricing is shifted by a minimum of 50 to 75 basis points. But then for some of the stuff that's maybe a little more quote unquote secondary or tertiary, or maybe that has a shorter lease term with a weaker credit rating or credit profile, you're seeing pricing cap rates widen as much as 150 to 200 basis points. So it is a little bit nuanced based off of the product type that you're looking at and the specific asset that you're looking at. But generally across the board, things have shifted. And, we'll see what happens with the CPI print today. I think, a couple things broke with Signature Bank and Silicon Valley. But I think the general consensus still is that beating inflation is the number one priority. And so I don't have a crystal ball, but I tend to believe that interest rates are going to stay higher for longer. So, let's see what happens.
Interesting. A bold claim, right? Like that. I think that's the multi-trillion-dollar question is where do interest rates go? And no one seems to know. And it's like you have really, really smart people that can make a hell of a case for why one makes sense and the other one doesn't. I think taking your approach of it's higher for longer is better, right? Like if it's higher for longer and then they go down, that's a good thing. If I'm the real estate investor and I can go refinance that debt, but you want to make sure that when you underwrite those deals, that you can make it pencil in and it work at current rates. So same way for any client that's looking at buying a home and mortgage rates. And I keep hearing well, when mortgage rates go back down, I'm like, I don't know if they're going to go back down. I don't want you to get your hope up, but it's the same thing there too, right? Like the asset price itself has to come down. And a lot of the residential real estate just hasn't repriced in a way that makes sense. On other thing real quick, basis points. So I know that we both know that there might be a lot of people that don't necessarily know basis points. 100 basis points, 1%, 75 basis points, 0.75%. So just kind of highlighting that. What have you seen from conversations recently that have been impactful? So when you're talking to veterinarians, and obviously the corporate side of things is slowed down a little bit and those multiples have come down, but I mean, is the appetite still there from the ability for those that are selling to then still extend long-term leases with corporate entities? Are they still wanting that? Are they wanting to buy the real estate? Is it changing? Any updates there?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, the good news is if you look at this from just a 20-year, 15-year time horizon, long-term, even pre-pandemic, if you look at where the multiples are at right now, they're still doing much better than they were in 2016, 2017, right? Like at VMX, I was at WVC2, and I was talking to a lot of practice brokers we're tied in with. And, they were telling me, I mean, you're still getting 8 to 13 times EBITDA for some of these practices. Now, obviously, it's not what you were seeing in the heyday a couple of years ago where it was like 20, 22. I spoke to a practice broker who told me he sold a deal at 27 times adjusted EBITDA during the peak. And so, obviously things have come down, but if you look at it from a long-term landscape, you're still doing much better than pre-pandemic levels. And I would say that translates into real estate too. So, it might not be that you're able to get a 5.5 cap now for your 15-year NBA, right? But maybe it's a 6.25 or 6.5. Again, these are just arbitrary numbers. So even though the cap rates have widened, you still have to look at it based off of where things have historically been. Yeah. So for example, if you have a long-term lease with an NVA or a VCA or Blue Pearl, whoever it is, some of these larger multi-unit operators with really good credit, it used to be that maybe you could get in the low to mid 5 caps for a price, right? For your exit price when you sell a building. And even though cap rates have widened and it might look like, oh my God, things have come down by 10, 15, 20% based off of the height, you still have to look at it based off of where things have generally been. And so what I would say is a lot of these veterinarians, maybe they built their practice or built their building for $200 a foot, $250 a square foot. And now when you have a lease in place, it might not be that, you're able to exit for $500 a square foot, but maybe that lease is still propping up the value to $400 a square foot. And what I would tell you is the nature of net lease still hasn't changed, right? They're still very reliant. These buildings, the value is heavily influenced by macro conditions, so aka interest rates, who the tenant is behind the lease, and how long of a lease term you have in place. So those fundamentals haven't changed, right? If you have a 15-year lease or 10-year lease to a tenant today, in 3 years, you're going to have 7 years remaining. And fundamentally, that investment is less secure than a 10-year deal. So what that means is that every year that burns off that lease term, the cap rate that an investor needs to receive for the building goes up. And therefore, the price they're willing to pay for that fixed income has to go down, right? And so what I would say is you want to look at net leased as just, you want to look at it fundamentally. Hey, obviously interest rates have moved. They're probably going to keep going up or probably stay here for, at least from what we're hearing, for a longer period of time. But at the end of the day, if you sold a practice with a 10-year lease, you're still looking at this building being at a point where it's probably at its highest value because you have that long-term 10-year lease in place. And so, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. And to me, a lot of the math behind trying to figure out the value of real estate, yeah, there's big factors, but you can kind of boil it down to the main key things. I know we've talked about it before, but cap rates, can you explain that? Because if I'm selling, obviously I want a lower cap rate, right? Because that means I'm getting paid more. And if I'm buying, I want a higher cap rate because that means I'm technically getting more value for what I'm buying. But
yeah,
when you think about a cap rate, can you just kind of walk us through that real quick? I know we did it before, but it's been 2 years, and there might be.
I'm happy to give a refresher.
Yeah, let's do it. It's good for me too because I'm like, if I was asked point blank, what's cap rate? I'm like, net operating income's in there somewhere.
Yeah, you can just pull this up and just play on the clip.
Yeah.
So cap rate is it's just a fancy way of saying what is my rate of return, right? So I'll give you an example. If you invest into a building and that building is an apartment building and you put $1 million into that asset, and if every year that building is returning you $100,000 a year, you're receiving a 10% return. That's a 10% cap rate, right? Now, if you have another building and you invest $1 million into that building, but that building is only returning you $50,000 a year, that's considered a 5 cap, right? And so the question is, okay, well, why would you invest in building B when building A exists? Well, it all comes down to risk, right? The only reason I would ever invest in a building that's returning me 50,000 versus 100,000 is because I feel much safer about my $1 million in building B versus building A. Hence why I would accept a lower rate of return, right? So drawing from that, what does that tell you? A cap rate is a reflection of risk, right? How safe is my capital in a piece of property that I invest into, right? And so there's different things that make up that risk profile. Who is the tenant behind the lease? How is the location of the real estate? How long of a lease do I have in place? Do the rental increases go up with inflation or do they not? Those are all things you take into account when you're assessing the risk of an asset. And so, as I mentioned earlier, right, these buildings, they're fixed income assets, right? So you have a piece of real estate, it's leased out on a 10-year contract, and there's a set amount of rent that's going to be paid every single year for the period of 10 years, right? And so the investor needs to decide, hey, based off of all of these things, the location, the tenant, the lease term, what rate of return am I willing to receive for this asset, right? And so a big influencer of cap rates is interest rates. And so because interest rates are going up, cap rates across the board are going up, right? And so what you're seeing is people now, buyers, investors, they're looking to achieve higher cap rates on the properties that they're buying. Therefore, the price they're willing to pay is much lower than it was a year or 2 years ago. And on the flip side, sellers are now having to sell at higher cap rates, right? And so if they're having to sell at higher cap rates, that means they're having to sell at lower prices. And so that's what you're seeing kind of unfolding in the market.
Just to follow up there on kind of rental income increases, because a lot of people listening might be, hey, they're a tenant and they have a landlord. And I know the answer is going to be, it depends, right? But I'm going to still ask it anyways. With those increases, are they typically like it's a flat amount, it's tied to CPI, it's tied to like, is there anything that's typical that you see? And does it change by industry? Like within vet med, obviously we'll focus there, but what does that look like? Is it a 3%? Is it because if it's CPI, that could be a healthy increase from year to year.
Yeah. And the people that had CPI increases, they benefited and they didn't have any income loss, right, due to inflation degradation. So, what I would tell you is that is a good question, actually. There is a standard, if you will, especially in veterinary medicine and healthcare real estate. The standard has always been 2%. And the reason why is because inflation has always averaged over 2%, right? In retail and some of those other products, you've seen 10% rental increases every 5 years or 7.5% increases every 5 years. But the norm in healthcare real estate has always been 2% a year. And what you've actually seen because of the rise in inflation, you've actually seen that changing a little bit. So now more and more, what you're seeing in leases, what we're seeing is rental increase structures of 3% a year, right? Or 2.5% a year. I would say 2 to 3% is definitely the average. Historically, there's plenty of leases out there that call for CPI increases. I think a lot of tenants and their advisors are probably going to advise against that now moving forward. They'll probably say, hey, look, it's going to be the lesser of 2% or CPI, or it'll be CPI, but with a minimum floor of 2% and a ceiling of 4%, right? So, generally it's the thinking was that it should just be in line with where inflation has been historically.
Yeah, and I know anyone that's listened to this and heard me talk about inflation, it's such a nasty topic because CPI is dramatically understated for like what is inflation, and like we go on a whole tangent on like what is inflation, but I'm not going to get us distracted. I'm not going to take the bait. I'm gonna stay focused on real estate.
Okay.
For those that currently own, that are maybe thinking of like, okay, I have this big asset. It still obviously has a bunch of value compared to where it's been, call it 5 or 10 years ago. What factors do they need to be considering today? And I would imagine a lot of them still are kind of anchoring to those highest points because that's just human nature, right? Like, oh, well, so and so sold their real estate for this, so like I obviously get the same deal. It's like, what would you encourage that practice owner that's thinking about exiting and trying to figure out what they do with their real estate?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first just get some advice, and I think many times, like people think about, talking to a real estate broker, then having to go through the process and sell and pay a commission. What I would tell you is, in anything in life where you want good advisory, you're going to want to have a good representative, or a good outcome. You're going to want to have a good representative, whether that's an accountant, whether that's an investment banker, whether that's a lawyer. And so what I would say is get in contact with a real estate broker that you trust. It doesn't have to be us, but it could be anyone that has sold, tons of vet real estate, dental real estate. and really have them be honest about what are the red flags with the asset, what are the good things, what are the bad things, and what to look out for. Because it's not just generally all about having a macro perspective as well and understanding what's going on in the vet space. It's also about understanding the fundamentals of that specific piece of real estate. Like, for example, if you have a vet tenant that's paying $35 a square foot and market rent is $20 a square foot, and let's say they're on a 3-year lease and maybe there's one doc remaining at the practice, you probably want to start thinking about an exit strategy, right? If God forbid they end up leaving, you're going to have to mark that rental rate to market. When you release it, you're probably going to need to adjust it to near $20 a square foot. And then what happens to the value of the real estate? It gets decimated, right? So there's things like that you should be aware of. Other things like, hey, look, if I've got a 7-year lease to a vet tenant and it's a flat lease, well, what does that mean? That means my income is not growing. That means inflation is beating up my cash flow every single day, every single year. And so the income that you're receiving today is actually not going to be the income you're receiving in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. That nominal value is actually that real value is actually going to be way less, right? So having an understanding and having a broker that could just kind of provide a holistic view is, I think, what would be the best step. And, there's different nuances to it. Like I said, right? Understanding the tenant, understanding the credit profile. How are they doing from a unit level perspective? How does the contracted rental rate compare to market rental rates? Right? All of these things matter. And so just being able to tap on someone and be like, hey, just give me an honest, unemotional assessment of my piece of real estate. And then from there, make the best decision possible for yourself.
And then for those that are owners, going to be owners, maybe are leasing, want to either build or buy. I mean, is now a good opportunity? Is it going to be better? Does it continue to improve? I know you said you don't have a crystal ball, and my joke is always mine's in the shop when people ask me these questions. So what do you think for those that are looking to acquire veterinary real estate? I mean, is it still
what I would say is what I would say is it all just depends on the entry price. Construction costs are still pretty high. And so what I would say is just make sure that you're not buying it at inflated rates and not being emotional about just having to buy a building or having to develop your first vet hospital. Maybe see it out, maybe wait a little bit, get some good advice. But again, it just depends on the numbers at the end of the day. What are you projecting? How many doctors do you have partnering up together and going into the practice? What do you think your revenues are going to be? Are you going to be able to, if you turn around and do a sale leaseback, or maybe if you're going to go lease a space, are you going to be able to sustain that lease rate based off of the EBITDA that you're clearing every single year? So what I would say is just be diligent about it, right? And just be mindful of the fact that you're not overpaying for anything and not jumping the gun. Construction costs, generally speaking, are still pretty elevated. They hopefully are starting to come down now. You are seeing little kind of trends pointing to that direction. But, I would say just like anything, just, make a mindful and thoughtful decision based off of having as many facts as possible.
Yeah. And I've seen recently with a couple clients that are in major metropolitan areas that need new space and need more space, just how expensive, or you can go from being extremely profitable to be like, yeah, you're still making good money, but it's not going to be what it was at the old space, right? Because that readjustment for more space or that better, higher quality location but the decision is, I can bring another doctor. Like, what is that worth, right? Like, and trying to make best assumptions is super important with the idea of like what that real estate can bring. Because ultimately, if you can grow your business, which is typically a high margin, great cash flowing business that can sustain that, then fantastic. And that will drive practice valuation in the future, which is, hopefully going to be a big chunk of, for a lot of these people, what their retirement savings or that kind of work optional bucket looks like into the future.
And as long as you focus on the operations, which is what the bread and butter is of a lot of these veterinarians, is just providing great care, running a great practice. The real estate, it shouldn't be an afterthought, but it's a bonus, right? At the end of the day, don't sacrifice the operational integrity of your practice, of your financials, just because you want to own real estate, right? That'll come. And so, that would be my advice there, is just don't chase.
If you can improve the health of an animal, you do it, right? Of course. That's what makes veterinarians special. You're mission driven. My friends at LifeLearn are the exact same way. For over 25 years, they've been partnering with you and your peers, providing affordable, customizable, online software solutions. These solutions save time, increase efficiency, and assist in managing all aspects of operations. Why? They want to help you improve your partnership with pet owners to improve pet health. LifeLearn has award-winning digital media solutions and are leading the pack as they've prioritized having extensive veterinary knowledge throughout their teams. That difference is seen, it's heard, and it's read by thousands of people across the country. Relax, grow, and thrive with LifeLearn. Click the link in the show notes for an exclusive offer to see how LifeLearn can allow you to get back to what you do best.
I think that's wise, and it's really hard. You talked about the emotional decision because people get so wrapped up into, ooh, but this is like the perfect location. This hasn't been available, and like I have to go now, and there's a lot of pressure. And yeah, the environment is a little bit more unclear as far as what happens next. And so trying to make sure that there is a little bit of a room for error in case you get some calculations wrong or the business slows down a little bit. You don't want to say, hey, we hit all-time high revenue in 22 and we're just going to grow again by the same amount in 23. And that's how we're going to grow into this space. That can make things tight.
Totally.
Go ahead.
No, I was agreeing with you. I was just saying, I mean, do a stress test, right? Like if your income goes down by 20%, if the real estate goes down by 20%, are you still going to be okay? Tap on someone like us or anyone else you trust and be like, hey, look, if I buy this building and eventually when I have a corporate entity buy us out, or if I decide to do a sale leaseback, so just stay independent and do a sale leaseback, well, what can you project on an exit price, right? And then you could reverse engineer from there and be like, hey, does this entry price make sense for me, right? But I think the moral of the story is not to beat a dead horse, is just do your DD and study it as much as possible.
Do you see more direct sale leasebacks? Has there been anything that's changed since we chatted before that has either surprised you or been like, yeah, this is kind of what I thought it would be over the last 2 years?
In terms of distribution between sale leasebacks and
yeah, like have you seen a pickup or a change or an adjustment to kind of the decisions that were made? Let's call it pre-2020 to now.
Well, you're definitely just seeing a slowdown in consolidation, but I think that was predicted. I think everyone realized like we were in a bull market, there was a frenzy. And so, eventually the bell had to ring and things had to stop, or at least slow down a little bit. I will say I'm not that surprised. I think generally in healthcare real estate, you see a good amount of sale leasebacks happen, but in specific pockets of healthcare, and I consider animal healthcare to be healthcare, is there's just so much private equity involvement in the space and so much consolidation going on, multi-unit operators taking on funding, going out there, buying up practices left and right. And so for that reason, you haven't seen sale leasebacks be the popular kind of mode of monetization. Mostly it's been like step one, build your practice. Step two, sell the practice. Step three, sell the real estate that's leased to a larger entity. I do think that in a higher interest rate market, where lending requirements are going to tighten up a little bit, where consolidation is going to slow down, I do predict that sale leasebacks are going to become more of a popular method of monetizing real estate. And we've done sale leasebacks in the veterinary space before. They've been very successful. And I think one thing people don't realize too is when you structure a sale leaseback, you still have the ability to go sell that practice at any point in time, right? So let's say you own a vet hospital and then you sell that building and sign a long-term lease with that investor, call it 10 years or 15 years. You still have the ability to sell that practice at any given point in time to a credit-worthy operator. And so many times, anyone who's going to buy you anyways is going to be a regional practice or it's going to be a PE-backed aggregator, right? And so, it's relatively easy to just at that point sell the practice and have that person come in and assume that lease, have that entity come in and assume that lease. Because that entity, no matter what, either they're going to sign a brand new lease or they're going to assume a lease. The thing to be mindful of is to structure the lease in a way that's going to be acceptable, right, to that eventual purchaser of the practice. And so we try to do a thorough job there as well, just being like, hey, look, let's analyze your financials, make sure your EBITDA is covering the rental rate that you're projecting in a very healthy way, make sure the lease rate isn't above market. And many times we'll tap on practice brokers or investment bankers too. Just be like, hey, what do you guys think of this based off of everything you're seeing in the OpCo side? I think that's one trend. You asked about trends. I think that's one trend that I expect to see, over the course of the next 6, 12, 18 months.
I don't think in the first episode that we did that I let you ask me a question, but that's something that I started doing in the various different episodes. So as we kind of round out today's conversation, do you have any questions that you want to fire my way? And it can be something that's on topic. It can be something completely different. It can be serious. It can be funny. I've been asked lots of different things. Anything top of mind?
Honestly, man, I love what you put out on the cryptocurrency space. I know we talked about this a little bit at BMX. With this debacle at Silicon Valley Bank, Signature, and I think, and correct me, you're the expert on this, right? But the thesis behind Bitcoin was that it provides a decentralized sort of platform, right? And it kind of puts a lot of the autonomy and the independence and the agency on the Bitcoin holder. And as this SVB thing kind of collapses, you're seeing the US government come in and guaranteeing these deposits. How do you think generally the Bitcoin market or that community is going to react? I think I saw earlier today, Bitcoin like broke 24,000 or 26,000. The general thinking would be, as something like this happens, this is the thesis that Bitcoin was guarding against, that you're going to see Bitcoin start to raise in value. I'm curious to just get your thoughts and understand your perspective.
There's an ongoing joke in kind of the Bitcoin space that all things are good for Bitcoin, and it's kind of true because Bitcoin really doesn't care, right? Like Bitcoin is going to do what Bitcoin does, but yeah, ultimately all banks are fractional reserved, and the reserve requirements for banks to hold reserves was moved to 0% in 2020. So they literally have to be backed and hold $0 in reserve, and so every single bank is fragile. JP Morgan is fragile. Citibank is fragile. Bank of America is fragile. SVB is fragile. Signature Bank, Silvergate, all these are fragile, right? And the funds aren't there. But what happens, and this is a big thing that I probably can't articulate it as good as many others, because this is just not, I'm not the foremost banking expert, but we have an economy that needs credit creation to keep growing. And what the Federal Reserve has done is they've done, like you talked about, quantitative tightening, which means they're pulling money out of the system, right? So they've pulled about $1 trillion out of the system, right? And that has, like, the rivets are popping off, right? Like you're starting to see stress that's out there, and we don't know who the weakest banks are. You don't know who's going to tweet something. In the era of social media, it makes this stuff, kind of this contagion fear, even worse. I think that's why they had to step in and do what they did for a bank that, yeah, it's big, but SVB was a 15th biggest bank. 15 or 16, 200 billion in deposits. Big, but it should not be systematic to the whole entire U.S. Banking system. But it was deemed that by the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and I think that's very telling, right? And so the idea being that if I take responsibility for my own money and this thing that I work for, and I can hold it myself, and I don't have to have counterparty risk, which means I'm trusting someone else. Yeah, that seems really attractive in a moment where I can't get my money out. And so I think that whole thesis of having money that's independent of third parties and government, and something that's pure math and code and doesn't care who you are and what you do. The other thing that makes me think about it is, earlier you're talking about real versus nominal returns as a landlord, right? Like pricing your rental rates in dollars in a period where they're going to come and have to fix these rivets popping off, which is going to end up being quantitative easing, which I think that they've kind of kicked that off here recently, right? We're going to see massive stimulus, bigger than what happened in COVID, bigger than what happened in 2008, because they have to. I feel confident. I don't need my crystal ball to get back from the shop to know that they're going to devalue the dollar. They're going to have to print more money because the system needs it to run. It's like an engine that's leaking oil. They have to put more and more in all the time, or it's going to seize up. Like fundamentally, that's what's happening. So yeah, the Bitcoin thesis is unchanged. And I know that I'm always like the person that always critiques it and says, it's Bitcoin, not crypto. And I don't mean to be an a-hole all the time, but it's like there's a very big fundamental difference between VC-backed tokens that were there for a cash grab that will eventually die in the vine versus Bitcoin that is something that's truly independent, decentralized, no one controls it, and it's a consensus, protocol that is global money. And I think, the day that Isaiah's in his rocking chair, gray and old, and talking to his grandkids, yeah, Bitcoin's global money, and it's like we get to be along for the ride for that, and I think it's pretty powerful. And if I'm a tenant and thinking about it in the future, I want to price my real estate rates in Sats, in Bitcoin, because it protects me from being devalued. Now, right now, if I'm leasing that, hell no, I don't want to do that. Let me pay you in dollars. Yeah, let me pay you in dollars. But I think a forward-thinking real estate company, and this will happen, I will predict this, and we'll have you back on the show at some point. Within 5, I'll say 10 years. Let's say 5 for fun, because I make predictions and I'm wrong all the time. I think in 5 years you'll see a noteworthy real estate company that's going to say, hey, we want to price our buildings and your rates in Sats, because it's volatile, But volatility is only a problem when it's going in the wrong direction, right? Like Bitcoin being up 20% after SVB fails. No one's complaining that, hey, Bitcoin's too volatile, right? Like everyone loves the days where it's up and to the right. But I do think that helps protect small business owners. It protects investors, and it aligns because fundamentally you have a measuring stick that's unchanged. Because right now, like, hell, I don't know how much money they're going to create in the next 5 years. So how do I write a 5 or 10-year or 15-year lease? To me, that is way too much exposure versus fixing it to something that I know with certainty is 21 million and they can't create more of it.
That's interesting. The thing I just thought about right now is, with the US dollar, at least as it is today, it does provide stability, right? So if I go buy a building for $2 million and I need to get it financed, call it at 60% leverage, and I need $1.2 million of debt, how would the bank that would be lending in effectively dollars be able to coexist with a piece of real estate that's being priced out in Bitcoin? Because at the end of the day, like, these banks are trying to maintain a certain level of debt service coverage ratio, a certain loan to value ratio, and with the volatility of Bitcoin, how do you control? I guess, how do you stabilize that? Like, because then it's I guess the way I look at it is like, because it's so volatile, that real estate, if it's priced in Bitcoin, is going to be so volatile. How would that affect the capital stack that's already on the table?
I think it changes. It's going to be completely different. There's a really good site, and since we do have video, maybe I'll risk showing this, but we'll do it for fun. This will be good. So Let me share. I'm going to share my screen, and it's probably going to duplicate this. So let's do that. So there's a site called priced in BTC 21, right? And I think this is something that I've shown a number of different people. But let's go to consumer goods, and let's go, and it's not going to show you commercial real estate. But if we go and we look at the price of a house, a median new house in the United States, and we're going to price it in, we'll do it in Bitcoin versus Sats. It'll make it easier. And let's do it all time. And let's put it in dollars as well, right? So what this is showing you is, if we go back to 2012, right? It was about 44 Bitcoin estimated for a new house. Today, that's going to cost you roughly about 20. Where when you look at it in dollar terms, right, that inflation, the increase in the money supply, it pushes that up, and you see that dramatically going up and to the right. Where, hey, in 2012, it was $221,700, and now it's almost $500,000. And so, to me, the same thing, right? Like, if you have a fixed unit of account, like, ultimately, you're able to just save up for something, and you won't need to borrow as much for something because it's artificially, increasing in value, because just the units in the new creation is,
you just keep printing money. I see it.
And so it's all going to be kind of relative from that standpoint. But it's going to be different. And I think the idea of, existing banks and the existing structure and Bitcoin, like, there's going to be a long time for it to exist together, but at some point, like, it does switch and flip. And 5 years is likely way too soon for that to happen. Like, so people can laugh at me, but that eventually, I think, is where it goes, because at the end of the day, you're going to ask, if I'm going to hold this asset, I want to be paid in something that has true value. And right now, unit of account, medium of exchange is the dollar, without a doubt. And that's unlikely to change in 5 years. But I think some people will start to think about, if I'm going to tie things up long term, how do I have confidence? Because money is a confidence game. And when you see bailouts and things happen, and it starts to bring in, like, how much confidence do we have in this? So we don't know. Like, the ripple effects haven't been felt all the way. I think this is the tremor, not the earthquake, from that standpoint. So there's probably more fun to be had, depending on how you want to define fun. But there'll be more interesting things to follow along with. But I look at real estate as something that, ultimately, at the end of the day, you need somewhere for your hospital to practice. It doesn't matter what the unit of account is for that, but you ultimately need a building to live in, to go buy stuff that you need for life, and to operate your business. And regardless of whether we're on a dollar standard, Bitcoin standard, you're going to need those things. The pricing, all that, it's going to change, but the real estate is going to be there. So I think it's still a valuable asset. It's all about, like, what you talked about, the price that you pay, right? So you want to look at it from a price perspective, and are you getting value for it?
Yeah, totally.
way too long-winded of an answer
No,
for a
I
simple
appreciate
question.
that. I think it's always cool just hearing I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about Bitcoin, so it's always cool and fun to learn about and hear from someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So,
well, again, who knows if I know what I'm talking about, right? Like I can just be completely pulling stuff out of the air. I try to consume content that makes me better informed and think about things in a longer time horizon, the same way that most investors think about things. Like you want to think about it in big waves into the future. And I think one of the big waves and one of the big things is just the adoption of money. And it's not going to necessarily be in the United States, right? Because like you talked about, we have for the most part, the best currency in the world. And we've been blessed with that opportunity. But there's a lot of other places around the world that will adopt it first.
Yeah.
So we'll see it continue.
Yeah, we'll see, man. We'll see.
All right. So outside of Bitcoin, talking about real estate, when people are curious, have questions, want to connect with you, learn more, where would you send them? Where's the best handoff for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, you can reach out to me directly. I'm actually on Twitter now too. My handle is Real Estate Rahul, so real estate, and then my name is spelled Rahul. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and then you can always email me too. That's rahul.chhajed@matthews.com. So,
Perfect.
Yeah, any questions you have about vet real estate, healthcare real estate, or just real estate in general, reach out to me and we can connect.
Perfect. I'll have all that in the show notes. People can find it. As always, I appreciate it, and we'll have to have you back with getting more updates. And
this is always fun, man. I appreciate it.
Recruiting team members in your veterinary practice has never been this hard. You can either bury your head in the sand and hope it goes away, or adapt. Enter Guardian Vets. By leveraging best-in-class technology, you can empower your staff and reduce their workload. Help reduce burnout. You also provide a better experience for your clients and patients, which you want to do as you serve them. The solutions Guardian Vets offers includes after-hours triage, virtual CSRs, that know your team and processes, telemedicine, and so much more. Become the employer of choice in your area by offering the best tools to position your team for success. Whether you're starting a de novo, clinic, multi-doctor, or multi-location, Guardian Vets can help you be more efficient and effective. Go to their website, guardianvets.com, click the Get Started button, then let them know that I sent you, right? Let them know the Vet Success Podcast sent you. Get 50% off your first month. Don't let another quarter or year happen before you start making changes, because you know you need to. So talk to the Guardian Vets team today and implement a new solution. Have you ever walked into a space and thought, wow, this place is beautiful? There's a reason for that. Architecture has this innate ability to impact emotions and perceptions. My friends at Apex Design Build bring beautiful and functional spaces for veterinarians nationwide. Apex is a fourth-generation family-run company that is fully integrated from the design, architecture, and construction process. They help you mitigate risk, eliminate surprises, save time, save money, and reduce your efforts. Sounds great. Check out their amazing work and have access to their square footage calculator to help you plan out your expansion or new build. Click the link in the show notes for the exclusive offer and learn more about Apex Design Build. Why do banks seem to always be impersonal, slow to answer questions, or give you the runaround when you need money for your dreams? Enter Panacea Financial. Panacea Financial is a nationwide digital bank built for doctors by doctors. Whether you're a veterinarian in training, practice owner, or aspire to be a practice owner someday, Panacea Financial is a bank designed specifically for you. It was started by two doctors who were frustrated working with banks and so started their own to serve their community. With common sense lending guidelines and fast decisioning, they've helped doctors all across the country start, grow, or acquire their dream practice. Looking to buy into a practice, Panacea helps doctors with practice buy-in loans, and they are funded in a matter of days. If you're ready to join the thousands of doctors nationwide who have decided to get independence from traditional banks, visit panaceafinancial.com today to see how you can get your dream practice started. Panacea Financial is a division of Primis, member FDIC. All right, so there are a lot of great job postings that I want to get to. And so we're going to start off with Bayside Hospital for Animals. Great work-life balance in beautiful Fort Walton Beach, Florida. No weekends, Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, no on-call or emergencies. It's an appointment only here. Currently a 2.5 doctor practice, new owner in 2021, bringing some fresh life into the hospital. The new owner had been there for 6 years prior working, so definitely understands the team, the processes, and the community. Lots of investment in people and new equipment. ProSal is the pay structure. Far too many benefits for me to list. Email baysidevet
251@yahoo or call 850-864-1857. Join a thriving, growing small animal practice in Vermont on the Quebec border. Full-time ideal, part-time is considered. The idea is to start with the team, patients, and clients in outdoorsman or outdoor woman's paradise while being able to practice high-quality medicine. Compensation is write your own structure within production capabilities. Literally, it is the owner wants to find the right person and is happy to negotiate, chat through, and find the right fit. If you want autonomy and a boss that enjoys teaching, reach out to Newport Veterinary Hospital. You can email newportveterinaryhospital@gmail.com. North Central Indiana, looking for an oasis in the chaos. Who isn't, right? Come join the amazing team at Fulton County Veterinary Clinic. They strive to foster a fun, fast-paced work environment while providing quality patient care. They utilize the support staff efficiently so that the doctor is available to practice medicine and do what you're trained to do in less time and paperwork, which is great. Lots of investment in new equipment and technology to support you, full-time or part-time available. Small animal and exotics are both seen there, so no ER, no on-call, no weekends, competitive salary with sign-on bonus offered, and far too many benefits to list. Go to Fulton County Veterinary Clinic. So type that in and you'll find the job posting there. Last but not least, join Watertown Animal Hospital. Personable small animal veterinarian wanted for well-established current 5-doctor mixed animal practice in northern New York, which is an outdoors person's paradise. Again, 2 of those. So if you like the outdoors, you can look at Vermont or New York. They have plenty of support staff with 6 CSRs, 6 licensed technicians, 4 animal caretakers, 2 technical assistants, a hospital assistant, a practice manager, and a bookkeeper. Focuses on mentorship and investment on the people and the technology. That's been a strategic initiative by the leadership team. No on-call, 24-hour ER less than an hour away. Salary based on experience, but no less than $95,000. Can be straight salary, pro sal considered. Want to discuss that with the right person. Tons of benefits. Again, too much to list. Please reach out to watertownpetcare.com for that option as well. So again, if you find a role or a job or talk to anyone and it helps you in any way, I would love to hear that feedback. So please reach out. Let me know what you're able to do. And I will continue to post these. So if you are an owner, reach out to me, let me know. And we'll go from there. And until I hit a capacity of I can't keep recording these, I want to let people know who are high quality owners around the country looking for great help. So with that, we'll talk soon.
Thanks for listening to today's show. The comments made on today's show should not be taken as investment, tax, or legal advice. All comments are for educational purposes only. You should talk to your professional team before implementing anything. If you want or need financial advice, my day job on Not Podcasting is helping veterinarians grow their net worth. Our team is taking new clients, and we are ready to talk to you at any stage of life. Come as you are. I always say, bring the mess, right? Like if things are unorganized, that's okay. There's no prerequisites to become a client. Isaiah Douglas is a partner at Vincier Wealth Management. Isaiah is a registered investment advisor, registered with the SEC. The biggest compliment you can give me in the podcast is to share it with a friend. Reviews help the show get found, and Apple Podcast is the platform that is predominantly used for people listening to the show. If you have 3 minutes, love the show, head over to Apple Podcasts, give us an honest rating and review. It helps more people find the show. Also, the new YouTube channel is up, and I'd love to have you subscribe. Vainly, I want 100 subscribers at least. Lots more, obviously, right? But I get a vanity URL if we get to 100. That would be great. It makes it easier to find the YouTube channel as well. For all of today's links, information, head over to the veterinariansuccesspodcast.com. There you can subscribe to your favorite podcasting platform. It'll be a link to that YouTube channel I just talked about. You won't miss any other episodes, whether you listen on Spotify, whether you have some other ancillary podcast platform. Please like, subscribe, all that stuff. It certainly does help. I appreciate it. Finally, if you want more information, insights, want your voice to be heard, want to share ideas for content, say, hey, Isaiah, I want you to have this guest. I want you to talk about this topic. Go over to the Facebook group. So you can search for the Veterinarian Success Podcast on Facebook or head over to veterinariansuccesspodcast.com, scroll to the bottom about your host, click on the Facebook icon, and that'll get you in the group. But thank you so much for listening. It means a lot to me to be able to see the podcast grow and continue to impact people. So with that, until next time, we'll chat soon.